On what was a normal stroll through its habitat in the winter of 1985 at the Chattahoochee National Forest, a curious American black bear stumbled upon something peculiar lying on the forest ground. The bear would approach this item with fascination and began to paw and slash at it until it finally tore open, which is when suddenly a strong chemical odor would fill the air. And less than 10 minutes later, this bear would go on to experience something that no other creature on Earth has likely ever experienced before. This incredible and quite frankly unbelievable story has captured the world's attention, and it probably comes as no surprise that very recently, a popular major motion picture based on it has been making headlines across the world. Movies, however, are movies after all, and when Hollywood bases one on a real-life story, there are usually many differences between what's seen on film and what actually occurred in real life, which is why the following video will depict in detail the actual true story of the legendary cocaine bear. In the early weeks of December 1985, a hunter was cautiously trekking through the woods of the Chattahoochee National Forest in northern Georgia. His objective was to stalk and hunt a deer, which he'd been tracking for over a mile. However, as he continued to stealthily move forward, the absence of any signs of the deer made him doubt the success of his mission. But despite these frustrations of his, he nevertheless would continue to progress with the hunt, which is when he would just moments later notice a clearing up ahead. But to his shock and surprise, it wasn't a deer he saw in the clearing. Instead, it was a colossal American black bear. Though black bears are typically shy, the hunter knew that startling one could result in a potentially lethal attack. Equipped with this knowledge, he would then quickly hide behind a rock, gripping his rifle tightly as he began scheming his escape plan. His initial thought was to quietly retreat without the bear noticing him. But then the hunter would recall just how noisy the dried leaves he'd been stepping on were, as they made loud crunching noises under his feet while he traversed the wood, and he was concerned that his footsteps could alert the bear to his presence if he tried to walk out of the predicament unassumingly. At this point, he briefly considered standing up and shooting at the bear with his deer hunting rifle, but he knew it wasn't powerful enough to take down a black bear on time, if at all. Moreover, he knew that he was at risk of being attacked and mauled by the bear before he could even get a chance to subdue it. As he pondered his next move, he noticed something peculiar. He hadn't heard the bear for quite some time. And typically, of course, bears are noisy animals whose breathing alone can be heard from a distance. As moments went by, the hunter would grow more and more suspicious of the silence, which is when he stood up and, as quietly as possible, peers out from the rock he was hiding behind into the clearing. To his relief, he saw that the bear's body had been laying lifeless on the ground, and it was slumped forward in an awkward position. The hunter was so relieved by this sight that he almost burst into laughter, which is when, without hesitation of course, he emerges from his hiding spot and makes his way through the brush to get a better view of the bear. As the hunter stood over the young bear, he couldn't help but notice that something was off. The bear was obviously way too young to have died of natural causes, yet he couldn't see any visible injuries, nor did it look malnourished. It literally seemed to him as if this bear had simply dropped dead for no apparent reason. However, the hunter didn't dwell on this for long, and instead tried to in his mind piece together the most logical explanation for the bear's death. Little did he know that the real reason for its demise was far from logical. To uncover the truth of what happened, we have to go back to September 10th of 1985, when two pilots were flying their Cessna over northern Georgia. They would intercept a radio message intended for other pilots, discussing how their plane was going to be followed. Knowing the risks of getting caught, the main pilot of the Cessna instructed his co-pilot they would have to jump out of the plane. He then set the plane to fly on autopilot until it ran out of fuel or crashed. He then motioned for the co-pilot to follow him into the main cabin where their luggage was stored. The co-pilot, in a state of confusion and panic, complied, and as the men climbed over the front seats, they then began strapping parachutes onto their luggage while the main pilot instructed the co-pilot to open the side door of the plane. With the door open, a rush of cold night air and howling wind would fill the cabin, making it difficult for the pilots to communicate. The main pilot then proceeded to push the luggage out of the plane, with the co-pilot joining in. Once all the luggage was out, the main pilot handed a parachute to the co-pilot and gestured for him to put it on. As the co-pilot struggled to put on the parachute, the main pilot donned his own and suddenly pushed the co-pilot out of the plane. The main pilot would then jump out after him, leaving the plane on autopilot to eventually crash in a suburb of Knoxville, Tennessee, about 5 hours later. Meanwhile, an 85-year-old man named Fred Myers, who suffered from Alzheimer's disease, woke up before sunrise as part of his daily routine. Fred's routine was key in helping him manage his Alzheimer's symptoms, especially in the morning when he would feel much more dazed than at any other time in the day. And dawn was also the time where he would sort of go on his own kind of autopilot, if you will. However, this morning was much different than his usual ones when he noticed something strange in his driveway. As he went in to investigate, he saw the main pilot of the Cessna crash land on his driveway after his main parachute would fail to deploy fully, causing fatal injuries. A stunned Fred would then gather himself and make sure he wasn't imagining things due to his condition before calling the police, who quickly heeded his call and would shortly into an intensive search find a dead man dressed in a bulletproof vest, camouflage fatigues, and night vision goggles. But strangely enough, he was wearing Gucci loafers, which would make the police instantly doubt that he was military. And to find out the identity of this mystery man, I'm going to take you back to 2 weeks prior to the hunters' discovery of the bear in Chattahoochee National Forest. At this time, the black bear was living its typical bear life, foraging for food and wandering the forest. And on one such day, the bear spotted a strange object lying on the ground, which turned out to be one of the duffel bags pushed out of the plane by the pilots. Despite not knowing what was inside, the bear approached it with optimism and began clawing at this heavy bag. Its mighty claws would easily tear open a hole in the duffel bag, and immediately a strong flowery scent would fill the air around it. The bear then eagerly stuck its nose into the rip and began licking and sniffing the contents inside of this bag. It devoured everything inside. Little can this bear comprehend that it had just ingested 70 pounds of pure cocaine. The bear would then shortly after feel a surge of adrenaline so powerful it caused it to begin sprinting in a straight line at top speed. After running at this speed for about 100 yards, every major system in the bear's body would abruptly shut down, at which point it would collapse on the spot and perish. 2 weeks later, the aforementioned hunter stumbled upon the dead bear in Chattahoochee National Forest, and upon returning home he informed a friend about the discovery and also mentioned in passing that he'd seen a duffel bag in close proximity to the bear. At this point in time, the police had gathered information about the deceased man found in Fred Myers' driveway, who was identified as Andrew Thornton, the main pilot of the Cessna. Thornton was a 40-year-old former U.S. Army paratrooper who turned to the high-risk, high-reward trade of smuggling illegal goods as a means to support himself. The police also learned that Thornton, along with a co-pilot, had been flying the crashed Cessna found in the mountains of North Carolina. The co-pilot of the plane, who survived the jump, confirmed that Thornton was the main pilot and that they had pushed the luggage out of the plane over northern Georgia on his command before the crash. Most of the missing bags were eventually found, but some were still unaccounted for. When the hunter's friend heard about the duffel bag in the Chattahoochee National Forest, they thought it might be one of those missing bags and contacted the authorities, which is when the bag was later found near the dead bear, empty of its contents of course, due to the bear already having consumed every bit of it. And the reason why all the bags, including the one found by the hunter's friend, were filled with cocaine was because Thornton was of course a drug smuggler. On the night that he and his co-pilot jumped out of the Cessna, they were transporting 900 pounds of cocaine from South America to the US. And once again, if it weren't for the transmission that they'd heard on their radio from federal agents who'd been alerted to their drug run, they would likely have been successful in their missions. The authorities who had found the empty duffel bag in the Chattahoochee National Forest were unsure of where the cocaine had gone. However, they would decide to bring back the dead black bear's body and perform an autopsy on it based on a hunch, which is when the medical examiner discovered that the bear's stomach was filled to the brim with cocaine, confirming that it likely died from a massive overdose. However, the bear's story does not end here. Normally, after an animal is autopsied, it's thereafter cremated, but for some reason, the medical examiner decided to have the bear taxidermied instead. The taxidermied bear was then gifted to the Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area, and over the next 2 decades, the ownership of the bear would change hands several times, and it's unclear why, or even by whom. And reports furthermore indicate that it was also stolen once from a storage facility and sold at a pawn shop, and was even owned by country singer Waylon Jennings at some point. And although this story has become quite famous, there are still some lesser known facts about the infamous cocaine bear that I thought I'd add to this video that are in my opinion definitely worth knowing. The bear's real name was actually Pablo Escobar, in reference to the infamous Colombian drug lord, of course, Pablo Escobar. And in case you don't know, Pablo was well known for smuggling large quantities of cocaine. And large quantities, of course, is in fact an understatement when it comes to Pablo. When it comes to the psychological effects that the ingestion of that much cocaine would have on a bear, based on the available information, it's difficult to determine exactly what they were. However, experts have made some educated guesses based on how cocaine affects the human brain. Cocaine is a stimulant drug that can cause increased energy, alertness, and euphoria in humans. It also in turn can lead to increased heart rate, blood pressure, and abnormal body temperature, as well as reduced appetite and sleep. Over time, of course, repeated use of cocaine can lead to severe addiction and a range of negative physical and mental health effects, including anxiety, depression, paranoia, and psychosis. And given the bear consumed a large amount of the substance, it's very likely that it experienced at least some of these effects, especially immediately after initial consumption, when it, as previously mentioned, experienced a rush, which once again caused it to sprint in a straight line at top speed. Investigators furthermore indicated that the amount of cocaine that the bear ingested would likely have caused it to become hyperactive, aggressive, and definitely anxious, and it likely also suppressed its appetite and disrupted its sleep, causing further confusion to an animal that is famous for eating and sleeping aplenty. In the end, however, we don't know for sure how the cocaine specifically affected the bear's behavior or even its health, as there have been no scientific studies conducted on this topic to draw conclusions from. If this episode piqued your interest, then our previous episode about a gruesome great white shark attack that was captured on film is likely to do the same. You can find it on the end screen of this video.